Hey, I'm back with another video. This time I want to talk about the ever-controversial strain system. For those that don't know, strains are an endgame system for certain animals in the Isle, primarily apex carnivores. Although there are some exceptions like Quetzalcoatlus, Carnotaurus, and Omniraptor, all of them are carnivores. Strains themselves are powerful mutations that alter the animal into monstrous forms of themselves. They are split into three main strains: the Hyper-endocrine, the Neurotenic, and the Tissoblastic, each with their own powerful abilities. There is almost nothing in the game that can compete with these supernatural creatures, and the only known method to killing them is waiting for them to die by starvation. They are constantly hungry killing machines that could easily wipe an entire server if people let them. It's for this reason they are incredibly contentious in the community. Some love them, many more want them removed from the game due to their overpowered nature. I want to see them in the game, however, I also want them to be suitably challenging to unlock, and still somewhat balanced in the game's meta. They occupy the highest echelon in the food chain by design, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible to make them fun and engaging for all parties. This video is split into three sections. First we'll talk about how the strains should function in a general sense. Then we'll talk about the individual strains and finish up with my thoughts on herbivore strains. Let's get into it. Overall, strains should be difficult to obtain and even more difficult to maintain. From what we know, they are available to certain elder animals. Instead of dying naturally, they can choose to become a strain. I propose firstly to add more conditions to become a strain. Mutations earned from dying as an elder naturally are used in future lives. If these mutations are consumable, then they should be consumed in order to become a strain. Not only are you foregoing the mutation from this playthrough, but also paying a mutation you already had from a prior playthrough. This would make it impossible to become a strain back to back, unless you have multiple unused mutations available. Strains would only be available to players who have survived multiple playthroughs on a single animal. My next hurdle to becoming a strain would be to make only specific areas able to create a strain. Once you have all the prerequisites, you would need to find an appropriate place to become a strain, maybe a lab or a cave. During the metamorphosis, the Isle's security systems would broadcast an emergency to all inhabitants. The warning would inform that a strain is being created and at what location. This would let animals, mercs, and tribals evacuate or safe log before the strain can wreak havoc. Overall, every strain will have the issue of a rapid hunger drain that would make them impossible to maintain for long. Now let's talk about the individual strains, in order from most to least known. We will talk about how to make them better fit the archetype monster they represent, and how to give them specific weaknesses when we can. Keep in mind that the biggest weakness for all strains will be the rapid hunger drain, but individual strains will also have unique challenges that they should play around. We'll begin with the hyper-endocrine strain. This strain is the brute of the Isle. It's characterized by a significant increase in mass and tough, potentially bulletproof skin. They will also have an incredibly fast healing rate, and some individuals even have detachable lower jaws. Overall, this strain is extremely deadly in a frontal engagement, but due to its bulk, is not agile or subtle at all. They would either be the same speed as their normal counterpart or slightly faster. Their big weakness would be their poor stamina pool. They cannot continue a pursuit for long, and this would give prey a chance to escape. The stamina regeneration would be quick though, so eventually prey would want to hide or escape before their stamina recovers. This behemoth of a strain would be most suited to killing large, slow prey like sauropods, but would not be able to chase down smaller creatures due to poor stamina. It would still be possible with an ambush, but the strain isn't made to be fast. It's meant to rip anything it can catch to shreds. The nature of this strain would mean it relies more on its raw stats than any specialized abilities that the other strains possess. The Hyper is merely interested in amplifying already existing abilities. For example, the ability for a Hyper Carno would be a more powerful version of the normal charge ability. Overall, the Hyper-endocrine trades powerful abilities with simple sheer power, which should usually do the job. Conversely, this is the easiest strain to avoid, so it's potentially the most at risk of starvation. Let's move on to the Neurotenic strain. To balance Neurotenic strains, we must go off speculation. We don't know exactly what abilities it'll have, but it's safe to say they'll have worse overall stats than Hypers. They make up for this with their unique abilities. If they have abilities that tamper with technology, it might make Neuros more suited to fighting humans than other dinosaurs. Nonetheless, Neuros should not be faster than their normal counterparts. Their health should be slightly higher than their normal counterpart, but also have worse bleed resistance. Looking at their models, their skin looks thin, so blood loss might be its greatest weakness. Furthermore, they do not have eyes, and I don't know how they will be able to see. Maybe they use electroreception or echolocation to navigate. We don't know. This could either be a weakness or a strength, depending on its implementation. Overall, the Neurostrain should balance its powerful abilities with its fragile anatomy. powerful on the offense but comparatively weak defense. This elusive manipulator focuses on supernatural abilities to disrupt from a distance. The Tissoblastic strain is hardly ever disclosed by the devs. It's possible they were scrapped years ago. If it's still coming, it would be more of an assassin than the Hyper's brute playstyle or the Neuro's disruptor playstyle. The way I understand it, the Tisso will be incredibly fast, possibly the fastest animals in the game. Their damage would be very high, not quite hyper damage, but still formidable. It would also have unique abilities similar to Neuros. It's possible they could have an acidic spit, poisonous quills, camouflage, thermal vision, or similar styled abilities. These animals would be specialized ambush hunters. They would have slightly less health and bleed resistance to their normal counterpart. They would be very weak to fracture damage, which could cripple their speed and damage advantages. They would be so weak to fractures, it's even possible non-fracturing attacks above a certain damage threshold would deal fracture damage. This would coerce Tisso strains to play a float like a butterfly, sting like a bee playstyle. They would deal significant damage and bleed, but would not be efficient at damage trading due to their light frames. Now that we've covered the individual strains, let's talk about the issue with herbivores not receiving them. I think both herbivores and carnivores should have roughly an equal amount of content between the two. Carnivores are generally more popular than herbivores, and that isn't just some bias speaking. Herbivores just have less to do in the game than carnivores. The migration system will help the symptoms, but it probably won't fully fix the issue. When strains are released, the content disparity will become even larger. It is for this reason that I suggest to add herbivorous strains to the game. This would help even the playing field, but it adds a bunch of new problems. Firstly, this is a lot of extra work to make 3 unique strains for a bunch more animals. How I would fix this is add a unique herbivore strain instead of the 3 carnivore strains. This would cut down on development time and costs, and would also make the herbivores stand out from the carnivores. What this strain would specialize in would be up for speculation. It could even be more of a generalist strain. The next problem would be how to balance herbivorous strains. For carnivore strains, they're supposed to be balanced out by their extreme hunger drain. For an herbivore, that problem is nullified by the ability to graze, and generally have an easy time maintaining food. As a consequence, these herbivorous strains could live for much longer and maintain large groups of strains. They are also not incentivized to be incredibly aggressive, which is the thematic purpose of strains in the first place. In order to fix this, we must make herbivore strains difficult to maintain and encouraged to be aggressive at all times, even to other herbivores. One way to fix this would be to make strains turn herbivores into carnivores. It's a simple and effective fix for the issue, but also somewhat uninspired. There wouldn't be much of a difference between herbivore and carnivore strains. My next thought would be to make herbivore strains turn into omnivorous strains. They would not be able to graze. Their only food sources would be their preferred diets like pumpkins, mangoes, and such. These sources of food would only give a small proportion of food compared to meat. That would let herbivore strains be different to carnivore strains, but also be similarly terrifying and fit into the terror of strains more. The benefits of herbivore strains would be access to more sources of food, and the benefits of carnivore strains would be access to 3 unique strains with more abilities than 1 single strain. These suggestions will likely never be implemented. They are ambitious and probably unrealistic for the scope of the game. Nonetheless, I thought it would be fun to talk about. Hopefully strains will become a hallmark for the franchise when they're added rather than game-ruining mess most people assume them to be. Thank you for watching. If you have any thoughts or criticism, tell me in the comments. See ya.
Okay, we're out of the shit zone. We are out of the shit zone. That was fucking close.